Hey everybody, Grumplecorn here with my first Assassinate gameplay commentary. This video
Identify,
is just
mark,
intended to
and
be an
assassinate
introduction
the
because a
target
lot
of
of
your
people seem to be
choice.
stuck
Avoid being
on how the
marked by
basic
other
mechanics of this mode
Templars.
work. This video is actually my first session of the game where I'm trying to figure out how the mechanics work. So instead of narrating my constant failures to do it right, I'm just going to point out how you should do it right. So first of all, instead of a compass you have these silly white circular lines. When they're full, like this one is, it basically outlines a compass, so you can kind of imagine that there's a compass there, and that these arrows and lines are around on the edge of it. They work just like the
You
arrows
have
in
taken the
team modes
lead.
do. If it's an arrow, it's pointing at a Templar, and as you get closer, it'll widen out into a line, much in the same way that the slice of the compass gets bigger as you get closer. It lights up when you're in line of sight, just like the compass does. Um, there's one of these for every other Templar in the game, but they don't always show up. Templars who are at a long distance won't show up on it, and occasionally Templars who are close also won't show up, but as of yet nobody knows exactly why that is. So because I'm new to the mode in this game, I'm playing very stealthy. I'm moving extremely slowly, which it turns out isn't really necessary. Um, so I'm just meandering slowly towards these arrows, and as we get closer, they are widening out, and they're actually moving closer to the imaginary compass. Um, you have no targets and pursuers in this mode. Everyone is just wandering around with no contract. When you lock onto someone, you get the contract, you are the pursuer, they are the target. If someone locks onto you, then they are your pursuer and you're their target. That brings the obvious question of what happens if you lock on at the same time, and the answer is simply whoever gets the lock first is the pursuer. So if you are walking towards someone and you both lock at the same time and you both start mesh and kill, it's basically down to luck to determine who will survive. Um, I'm quite unwilling to move around in this first session, so I'm doing an awful lot of standing around even though I can hear
Massacre.
targets nearby. I start hanging off this roof trying to figure out where this guy is that I can see on the compass, but I can't find him, so I just start wandering around. As with the standard compass, when the line becomes a full circle, that means they're close and that the game isn't going to give you any more hints as to where they are. Um, so it's lit up now, which means that the person is somewhere here. Just there, the circle turned red and I started glowing. That's the indication that someone has locked onto you and become your pursuer. The reason you light up is just to tell you that someone's done it. The reason the compass lights up is because until they become your pursuer, you can track them using the compass. The instant they lock you and become your pursuer, their segment of the compass turns red to tell you basically which Templar locked onto you, and then it disappears so that you can't track your pursuers using the compass. In both those instances, the Templar who locked onto me was right next to me, so the entire compass turns red. But if they're at a distance, it'll just be a small bit of it that tells you the direction they're in. Um, and basically that means that if you keep an eye on where all the lines are pointing, whenever you get locked onto, you'll get an idea of what direction your pursuer is coming from. So even though you can't track them anymore, you can run away from them. I think in this case I might get the lock first, or just... okay, he gets the lock first, but I drop a
Stun.
smoke bomb and stun him. You don't have to have a lock to stun people, but going for the stun and naked stuns in this mode are just a bad idea. It kind of ends up like that, basically. You do need a lock to kill someone. It is possible if you lock onto someone and you get their contract and then they move out of sight and you lose the lock, you keep the contract, you have your old style compass to track them with, but you don't have a lock. You have to be locked on to kill them. So don't try to kill someone without locking on first, because you will just get a dodge animation and then they'll probably kill you. So with that, moving on to the killing side of things, first thing is you may have noticed I killed the guy I stunned. Because there's no particular pursuers and targets in this, if you stun someone, your lock on them turns into a pursuer lock, which you'll see in a moment with this Harlequin. And once you have that kind of lock, you can kill them even though you just stun them. You won't get full incognito, but you get a decent number of points and you can do focus and all that. So as you saw there, when you do get a pursuer lock onto someone, you get your standard wanted portrait and compass. You can track them with that compass. You lose track of all the other Templars while you have that compass, so you have no idea what's going on around you with regard to Templars. If you lose the lock, you keep the contract, so you can track them just like in Wanted. but you, as I say, you have to be locked on to kill them. If you release the contract by locking onto someone else or by pressing the release button, which is triangle on the PlayStation, then you give up that contract and you immediately go back to targeting all Templars, and that also means that that person can immediately lock onto you and kill you.
Contract lost.
There's a good example of that here actually. I released the contract on that guy because I can't keep up with him, but then forget the fact that he can just lock onto me and kill me. So keep that in mind, that even if you've gotten the lock, there's still no real targets and pursuers in this mode. Things can change very quickly. Regarding NPCs, NPCs are exactly like people in this mode. If you lock onto an NPC as your target, you will get a compass to track them with. Their portrait will appear. If you poison them, they will choke and die. They react exactly the same as players, but you get no points for them, obviously, so you want to avoid doing that. The game goes to great lengths to make sure you can't tell, except with your own skills, whether you have locked onto another player or an NPC. One way you can tell players apart is if you have a pursuer who is locked onto you and you lock onto them, you will expose them. That means that it will highlight them momentarily, telling you that yes, this is your pursuer. It will also reduce their incognito meter all the way down to the bottom, which means they only get a discreet if they kill you, and if they enter high profile for even a moment, they'll start a chase. So it's very good if you get a pursuer to try to get a lock on them, so you can be certain of who they are, where they are, and force them to get a low point kill. One interesting thing about having no contract is your incognito meter won't drop unless you actually have a contract, just like in Wanted. So if you want to chase someone without dropping down to silent or discreet or starting a chase, simply don't lock onto them. If you aren't locked onto anyone, you can run around freely and you will get an incognito kill as soon as you lock on. So if you have a target that hasn't seen you, this is an example of what happens if you don't do that. You end up with a discreet kill, or a chase even. Great, I start a chase, completely unnecessarily. If I had chosen not to lock on when I jumped off that roof, I could have locked on when I hit the ground instead and got on an incognito kill. The only risk with that is if they see you coming and they lock you first, you're going to run in trying to get the kill, and they're going to be your pursuer and kill you. Ideally, if you're locking on at the last second and going mashing buttons, you should try to mash, kill, and stun at the same time. But they aren't really in a convenient place on the controller to do that, so it's a tricky one. But if you could, it would be good, because that way it wouldn't matter. You'd get the drop on them. It will happen that people will lock you as your pursuer, but they'll think that they are your target, so they'll try to stun you when they should be trying to kill you, which means you can freely stun them if you're fast enough. So locking at the last second creates confusion. You gotta be able to react really fast. I just poisoned a guy who was lying on the ground. That's a very nice, fun thing to do. Poison is a bit weaker in this mode because it's so much easier to get intercepted, but it's strong in that because you can kill people very quickly, because you don't have to wait for the game to assign you a contract, you can just pick a new one. If there's two Templars near each other, you can, in theory, lock onto one, poison him, unlock, lock the other, kill him the old-fashioned way, much like you might do in a team game. So that can be very handy. Combining that with firecrackers or smoke bomb to make sure that none of you get killed in the meantime can make that a bit easier to do. There's an example of someone now who has realized they're locked onto because of the prompts the game gives you, but they don't know who is after them because I'm in a blend group. They can't tell, so they drop a smoke bomb. When they're still not sure, they run away. Once I've confirmed that there's an example actually of getting an incognito kill despite running up to someone. You just lock them up at the last second. If they're busy killing someone else, always lock them up at the last second, because there's nothing they can do about you anyway. As I was saying, once I've confirmed that my target is actually a player because they run around or drop a smoke bomb or something, I'll often break the lock because that makes them think that you aren't after them, and it means they can't expose you as their pursuer, although they can lock onto you as a pursuer, in which case you need to be ready to stun them. But yeah, it's handy. If you track people without marking yourself as a pursuer, they don't know someone is tracking them, except that they can see the white arrow following them. They don't get the whispers, which they will if you lock onto them. So it's a handy thing to do to manage your locks carefully. You can also lock onto bushes and they flash red. That's neat. I was fascinated by that for a moment. The game's ending, so I'm pretty much out of time, but I think that's all the basics. You really just need to play it and get the hang of it. It's pretty intuitive once you get the hang of it, but if you're dealing with situations where people are locking and unlocking very quickly, it can get very confusing as to who is supposed to be killing who, and that can get you killed. So it takes a bit of
You have
practice.
finished first.
And yeah, that's that. So enjoy.